The Russians have pivoted to a deadly new tactic, combining their drones with a time-honored tactical tradition. But is this dependent on some very expensive technology? Plus, is the U.S. Army already out of date in countering this new threat? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about the pop-up drone. Okay, so this is really interesting. This came to us originally from Telegram, but here's the interesting part is I actually heard about this when I was in Ukraine, and I didn't actually fully understand it. I assumed there was a translation error because the Ukrainians would say the drones wait in the road. And I thought to myself, drones wait in the road? That doesn't make any sense. A drone can't wait on a road. I assumed they meant that the drone hovered over the roadway waiting for a target to emerge. But no. In fact, it was literally the drones waiting on the road. Why? Because the Russians have pivoted to something called a pop-up ambush. And this is a really interesting tactic. Again, so what you can see is that the FPV drone, they depict it as sitting on a rooftop overlooking two roadways. And I think this is probably what the Ukrainians meant when they told me, oh, the drones wait on the road. And so they wait in a hidden location on the road or overlooking the road, while a reconnaissance UAV that functions as a repeater continues to observe the roadway. And when it sees a juicy target approach, the reconnaissance operator tells the FPV drone operator, hey, turn this bad boy on, get ready, there's a new target available for you to hit. And because the drone is in its standby mode, it's actually able to conserve its battery for a long time. Now, here's the thing. This tactic doesn't make a lot of sense if you're talking about a $250 drone, right? They're oftentimes so expendable that it's simply seen as worth it to just, when you see the vehicle approach, just send a drone from the operator, right? FPV drone operators are notoriously good at getting out, getting their drone airborne really with minimal notice, right? So why would you need it perched in a location? Plus, a lot of juicy vehicle targets are tough because they have jammers installed in them. In fact, almost all vehicles now have jammers. So why have this FPV drone sit at a roadway when you could just call it back? Well, the answer is that these new drones, you can't call them back. And before we talk about just exactly why, I wanted to mention that if you want to support the channel and get access to some uncensored combat footage, including some drone footage that's sent to me from units I met in my trip to Ukraine, literally footage that doesn't exist anywhere else on the internet. If you're interested, you want to check out combatvetnews.com. This is the way to keep me independent, right? Functions just like Patreon. Tuesdays and Thursdays, we drop the uncensored combat videos. Thursdays, we drop the Q&A for lieutenant tier and above. And of course, if you want the shout outs and to really support me, the colonel tier. So check the link in the description. Sign up today. Help keep me independent and support the channel. Okay. So what's the deal? Well, the answer is these drones are fiber optic drones. And this is something that the Ukrainians told me explicitly. They said, listen, the Russians are using these Chinese made or Chinese imported fiber optic drones, right? Now, of course, you guys know China would never send weapons to Russia, but they do occasionally send lots of spools of fiber optic, and they do sometimes send fun commercial drones. And what Russia does with those two is, well, not something the Chinese manufacturers are going to ask too many questions about. But the Chinese, of course, are sending the components for these fiber optic drones. Russia is assembling them, producing a $1,000 spool of about 10 kilometers of fiber optic cable and a $2,500 heavy lift drone unit, right? The drones need to be heavier in order to lift both the warhead and 10 kilometers worth of fiber optic spool. The result is a $3,500 weapon. Now, for context, guys, a Hellfire missile, right? This is the U.S. military's kind of workhorse strike missile. Costs on a unit basis about $150,000. So again, these drones are considered extremely expensive by FPV drone standards, but by the standards of basically any other weapon system, you're talking about, let's see, The Russians could launch 42 fiber optic drones for the cost of a single Hellfire missile. So, context. And so the Russians, though, there's a problem, right? These fiber optic lines work like a fishing line, right? And if you've ever fished as a little kid, you know that casting out that line is very easy. The line spools out with almost no resistance. The problem is when you have to reel it in. That's when you realize that if the line landed in reeds, touched a tree, fell on the dock, it's going to get tangled up and it quickly becomes a tangled mess. So the answer is these FPV drones with the fiber optic cable, they're 10 times as expensive as a conventional drone, but the problem is that you can't bring them home because that fiber optic cable only spools out. There's no reeling it in mechanism. You couldn't sustainably do it. That also means there's another problem, right? While FPV drones can patrol an area back and forth, when you only have 10 kilometers of spooled fiber optics, there's no reason. It's a total waste of your very limited fiber optic leash to zip-zag back and forth and back and forth. So these drones, they are at their best when they sit in a place and let the enemy come to them, let their targets come to them, just like a hunter, right? If you're a hunter in a hurry, you might get out your rifle and go stalk for a deer. The problem is just like stalking, just like these drones, that when you're out stalking, it's really tough. You can be heard. Drone detectors will detect your signal. So it can actually make things somewhat more difficult. But because these fiber optic drones, they don't want to move that much, they can't come home, and they're 10 times as expensive, placing them in a position where they can get oversight and they are on standby gives them the greatest chance of delivering a hit on the target. So let's say, in this case, a Ukrainian vehicle begins to approach, right? The reconnaissance drone says, hey, I see a Ukrainian vehicle coming. Maybe this thing has a ton of jammers, but it doesn't matter because fiber optic drones can't be jammed, right? There's no signal jamming that can penetrate, right? It's hardwired in. It's like it's a difference between Bluetooth and a wired mouse. At the end of the day, a Bluetooth mouse can there can be a lag. If there's other Bluetooth devices, it can get kind of funky, right? You don't have that problem with a wired mouse. Nothing cuts into the signal of those wires. So the drone doesn't care that this vehicle has jammers. In fact, it prefers it because then it saves the unjammed targets for signal FPV drones. So it sees it. It knows it's on standby so that it can sit there for 12, 24 hours. Who knows? And the vehicle, will say a truck approaches, and then the FPV operator turns it on and the drone strikes the vehicle, right? Meaning that vehicle, that drone definitely got a kill because the only thing that could stop it at this final point is either operator error, hitting a tree instead of the vehicle, for example, or if somehow the extremely lucky operators of this vehicle were able to shoot the drone with a shotgun. That's literally where the Ukrainians are at to counter these fiber optic drones. So this is a real game-changing tactic, right? You notice that this looks more like a drone. This functions more like a flying IED, right? Where someone is watching the roadway, the explosive, the warhead, is planted in a place that makes it vulnerable, and then boom, and it goes. The irony is, of course, that this is the exact same evolution that the U.S. military experienced in Iraq and Afghanistan, right? Prior to, when I was there, you saw insurgents begin to transition. They would use cell phones for most of the time to detonate the IEDs. But the U.S. military had developed their own broad spectrum jamming technology. And so they would broadcast this jamming signal. So as the convoy rolled by, the insurgent would be trying to activate on their cell phone, triggering the IED, and they couldn't do it until the convoy had passed. So to stop that, they developed command wire IEDs, right? The other option was pressure plate IEDs, but the U.S. military managed to counter those by having mine rollers that actually rolled slightly ahead of the vehicle, detonating them prematurely. MRAPs didn't really have that problem because they could survive these strikes, but The idea was that the insurgents would use command wires, which could not be jammed to detonate the IEDs. Now, that meant the insurgents had to get a little closer, but that was a risk they were willing to take. And so the fact that this evolution has happened once again, going from signaled to command wired to stop jamming tech, is something that, again, the U.S. military should have fully predicted, which is ironic because they haven't, right? U.S. soldiers are getting what they call electronic warfare backpacks later this year, right? The system is a combination of a jammer and a scanner. By the way, guys, this is technology that, again, is something the Ukrainians have in basically every single one of their vehicles. A combination of a jammer and a scanner that can listen, so to speak, for drone signals. In fact, it makes a really eerie beeping noise. Beep, 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 if there's a drone that is very close by. Don't ask how I know that. So, of course, the U.S. Army is going to buy hundreds of these things, right? So, a tiny fraction of what you would need to fight a peer adversary. And, of course, they're going to drop $100 million of taxpayer money to equip, train, and field the system that they call the Terrestrial Layer System, Brigade Combat Team Manpack, which is an absolutely dogshit name. And, of course, it's built by defense contractor Khaki. And here's the thing. They are patting themselves on the back. The system is on track to be the first dismounted electromagnetic attack electromagnetic support program of record for the Army, according to their electronic warfare management. Now listen, if you are the Chinese and you're thinking about invading Taiwan, okay, are you going to field jammable drones? Abso-fucking-lutely not. You're going to field the unstoppable fiber optic drones. In fact, the fiber optic drone is the future. It's not the future. That's the thing, guys. I was in Ukraine 3 weeks ago. They were in Touretsk, all over the place. So the U.S. Army is just now starting to equip itself to fight last year's drones. And this is what should really bother you about the U.S. Army. It's what bothers me about the U.S. Army's bureaucratized warfare system, right? The Army bureaucracy is designed to respond at a World War II pace of innovation, where there's a year between new technologies emerging on the battlefield. But the reality is when you have decentralized units fighting a very decentralized war, much like you're seeing in Russia and in the Russo-Ukrainian conflict, the pace of innovation is just so much more rapid because everybody is innovating. Think of it more like the war version of a VC fund, right? The central government funds a bunch of these units and they're all fighting, but they're empowered to all of them try different tactical solutions and including making purchases or even developing their own tech. And as a result, that means that specific tactics and technology emerge, Again, some Russian unit was the first one to stick fiber optic drones. In fact, there was a Ukrainian unit that pitched fiber optic drones a year ago to the Ukrainian command, but they declined because it was too expensive, preferring to focus on AI drones, which are seen as a cheaper solution, and still may be. So you have these units that emerge with new innovative technologies. But the central government funds all of them. But those handful of winners become super winners. Again, their battlefield-changing technologies are quickly distributed to all the units who have a huge incentive to field the best tactics and best equipment. And this is in direct contrast to the U.S. Army's very uninnovative system, in which units report only their problems, right? And while they may have some limited authority to make tactical changes to change the way they operate, the ability to field new or non-standard equipment is absolutely prohibited. And so the result is that the problems have to work their way all the way to the top of the Pentagon. The Pentagon has to put out a formalized request to its contractors to try to solve them. Then the contractors submit solutions for approval by the Pentagon. The Pentagon approves those solutions. You may note that the person who doesn't check if the solutions really work are the actual war fighters, right? And so then only when the Pentagon approves those solutions do they get piloted by individual units. And if those pilot programs are found to be effective in countering, then the the technology is, then the results are sent back up to the Pentagon. The Pentagon commissions them to mass produce the item. Then the item works its way back down. So you're talking about years, right? From the time that the U.S. military identified roadside bombs to the time that the first MRAPs were fielded to stop them or protect crews from artillery shells buried under the street, you were looking at a period of like 2 years plus. And so this, I think, is one of the things that to me, is one of the red alerts about the U.S. military, is that it is equipped to fight and win a World War II pace of conflict. It is not equipped and not prepared to fight and win in a dynamic, ever-changing battlefield, which is decentralized in terms of technology, tactics, and innovation. And that, I think, is what should keep you up at night. It keeps me up at night. Anyway, guys, I appreciate you. Please hit that subscribe button. You know it makes a difference for me. And a thank you to Martin Baum, Chris Rossi, Stuart Abel, Daniel Brown, Sergei Zinchenko, Chris Holmes, Chris Gorsuch, Daniel M., Ida Skycall, all of our Lieutenant tier members. I couldn't do it without you guys. I appreciate you so much, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.